In this video, we are now going to cover what exactly makes emblem teams so powerful, the class buffs. As the various names suggest, these buffs are really strong, but only apply to one type of unit at a time. We have ones for each class: cavalry, flyers, and armor. There is one buff for dragons, but at the time this video is being made, there has only been this one skill for dragons, and because of that, I don't think Dragon Emblem will be fully operational for a while. Of course, things can change in the future. So there are 4 types of emblem buffs you need to know and understand. Hone class buffs are similar to the regular Hone attack and Hone speed buffs that any unit can use. However, they work differently for emblem teams because they combine the two and grant adjacent allies attack and speed +6 through their next actions at the start of each turn. +6 attack and speed from one buff is insane and grants so much power to compare to a single Hone attack or Hone speed buff. The Fortify class buff is similar, and it combines the Fortify defense and Fortify resistance buffs. It grants adjacent allies defense/resistance +6 through their next actions at the start of each turn. If you want a defensive team, then you can't ask for much more than this. Combine a Hone class buff and a Fortify class buff and you have a unit with +6 to all stats at once. But we aren't done yet. Gold class buffs are a spur type effect and have the range of drive skills in that they are effective within 2 spaces of an ally. If you're not familiar with spur type skills, then you can check out a video I've made covering that topic. Spurs work differently than Hone and Fortify skills, so it's best you understand what you need to do to activate each of them. Gold skills grant allies of the same class within 2 spaces attack and speed +4 during combat. Not as powerful as a Hone buff, but you have the flexibility of not having to be adjacent to an ally when combat starts. Ward class buffs are the defensive version of Golds and grants +4 defense and resistance instead. Now, one thing to remember about these buffs is that Hone and Fortify type buffs do not stack. These will appear as blue numbers on your units, and applying 2 Hone cavalry buffs to a cavalry unit will not double the effects. However, Gold and Ward skills do stack because they are spur type skills. They only work in combat, and you can think of them as invisible buffs since they won't show up on your unit's stats, but they will be applied once a fight begins and you are within their range. Also, to make things easier, you can remember that Hone and Gold are offensive buffs, and Fortify and Wards are the defensive buffs. Each class comes with one of each of these 4 buffs. Hone and Fortify buffs have a fiery red background, while Gold and Ward buffs have blue and yellow backgrounds. The icons for Hone and Gold skills have the class icon and then a sword to show that they are offensive buffs. Fortify and Ward skills have a shield icon instead, so you know that they are more defensive. It's not a major issue, but if you don't want to check each and every individual enemy unit, then you should remember the slight differences between each buff icon. Next, we're going to cover where you can find each and every emblem team buff, and by doing this, I can explain why some emblem teams are maybe easier or harder to build depending on your gacha summoning luck. Let's start with Cavalry, because if you remember what I said from the last video, it was that Horse Emblem is the easiest to build because you can get all the class buffs relatively easily. Keep in mind that for all the emblem team buffs, you will need the 4-star version of the character if you want to learn the skill or inherit it onto someone else. However, my graphics will showcase what level you can summon these characters from. 3 stars means they're available in the summoning pool at 3 or 4 stars, 4 stars means they're available at either 4 or 5 stars, and 5 stars means they're exclusively only obtained as 5 stars, and will be really hard to get. So starting with Cavalry, you can see that there are a lot of 3-star available units. Hone Cavalry comes from Gunter, and Fortify Cavalry comes from Jagan, who are both easily obtained as 3 to 4 star units. In fact, Gunter can be obtained for free by completing his special map when he comes around on the rotation. In the bottom right, Ward Cavalry can be gotten from Eliwood at 3 or 4 stars, and also from Berkut. Now Berkut is a Grand Hero battle unit, meaning you will only get limited amount of copies of him, so you may not want to sacrifice him as skill fodder. Gold Cavalry is probably the hardest to obtain as it comes from Camus, who is also a Grand Hero battle unit, and Reinhardt, who can be summoned at 4 to 5 stars. The odd thing is that Reinhardt only learns Gold Cavalry when he becomes a 5-star unit, and I don't believe any other non-5-star exclusive class buffs requires this. For my own horse team experience, Gold Cavalry is pretty darn good. However, the most important skills are definitely Hone and Fortify Cavalry. Because cavalry units can move up to 3 spaces, there are many times where they will not be close enough to allies to receive the benefits from Gold or Ward Cavalry. Before I move on to the other classes, I want to again state that Horse Emblem is much easier to customize to your liking. We have a ton of cavalry units in the game, and Hone and Fortify Cavalry are not that difficult to get and pass along to whoever you need it on. Those are a few of the reasons why I think you see so many horse teams compared to, say, Flier Emblem teams. Speaking of Flier Emblem, just from a quick glance you will notice a huge amount of 5 stars on the chart. So unlike Horse Emblem, if you want to build a Flyer team and be able to customize who you give each buff to, well, you're going to have to work for it and get pretty lucky. Honed Flyers is probably one of the hardest class buffs to get in the game, only coming from Hinoka, who is a 5-star exclusive. Halloween Noe and New Year's Azura also have the skill, but they are limited time special event units, so once they are gone you only have Hinoka left. Reminder that limited does not mean gone forever, and Intelligent Systems has already brought back a few of the seasonal units on special banners. Moving on to Fortify Flyers, it's slightly more common since Shida can be summoned at 4 or 5 stars. Summon Korin also has it, but is also a limited unit. Fortify Flyers isn't a bad skill, but most Flyer teams go for Honed Flyers or Gold Flyers from what I've seen. Gold Flyers is also one of the easiest Flyer buffs to get, and you can get it from Paula, who can be summoned at 3 to 4 stars. This is a decent alternative to Honed Flyers because the Flyer teams can stick together much easier, so staying in formation to pass Gold Flyers to each other is a very viable strategy. You can also use Ward Flyers, also like Honed Flyers. You can only get it from Minerva, who is a 5-star exclusive, and from New Year's Camilla, who is a limited time unit. I don't see Flyer Emblem teams a lot, and I believe that does have to come from how hard it is to get most of the skills. Flyer Emblem is also my least built up team personally, so I don't really have that great of a grasp of what skill combinations work best. However, from facing teams in the arena, I can say that Honed and Fortify Flyers can make a scary flying fortress of a team. If you are lucky enough to have the flying mages, then consider giving them Blade Tomes and running Honed and Fortify Flyer buffs. I've encountered Spring Camillas and Summer Corins who not only dish out tons of damage, but are incredibly hard to take down too. Be careful if you run into a well-built Flyer Emblem team. I would say Armor Emblem is not that bad to customize regarding your buff choice. Honed Armor comes from Gwendolyn, who is a 3 to 4 star summon. Fortify Armor can be gotten from Sheena, who can be summoned at 4 to 5 stars, as well as Winter Lissa, who is a limited time unit. Gold Armor comes from Hector, who is a 5-star exclusive, however I would say you definitely do not need it if for a functioning armored team. Last is Ward Armor, who comes from Grog, who can be summoned at 3 to 4 stars as well. For army units, Honed and Fortify are definitely nice. Plus 6 to any stat is incredible, and since army units already have high base stats, they can start to reach some insane numbers. Having both are definitely useful if you use Armor March, since the team can become separated. However, without Armor March, your units will most likely be sticking together, and Gold and Ward are perfect for that. While Gold is a bit rare, most armors won't mind missing out on the extra attack and speed. Instead, one strategy is to use 4 Ward armors and stack the buffs. I will elaborate a little more on this in a bit. We've covered what each buff does and where you can get them, but now let's talk about how many you should use on a team. Here are some simple guidelines that you can follow so you don't make any decisions you'll regret later. First off, you will probably not want to have multiple Honed or Fortify buffs on one team. 2 Honed class buffs will not stack, so to avoid overlapping buffs, try to stick to 1 on a team. If you have 1 Honed and 1 Fortify buff, then you can think about filling the last 2 spots with Gold or Ward buffs. Next, you should know that Gold and Ward skills do stack, so it's okay to have multiple copies on one team. Sometimes having 2 Gold skills may be more useful than having 1 Honed skill. It will mainly depend on what type of units you use when you decide which buffs you want to take, which brings me to my last point. What buffs you choose will depend on your playstyle, availability of what buffs you even have access to, and then unit choice for your team. Every Emblem team has a variety of successful buff combinations, and I can't say you will succeed with the same setup if you swap out different units. You also will just have to work with what you have sometimes. An important lesson in Fire Emblem Heroes is that most times you won't have the exact skills or units you want, but you can make the best out of what you have. You may have to shift your playstyle, but there are tons of different ways to build an Emblem team. Different units may also benefit more from certain buffs, so that is another factor you need to take into account. So which units do you give each buff to? As I mentioned, there is no clear-cut answer, but here are some guidelines I like to follow when changing up my Emblem teams. For the offensive buffs, Honed and Gold, you want to put them on tanky units, and for the defensive buffs, Fortify and Ward, you want those on your offensive units. The reason for this is that each team member should carry a buff that they do not necessarily need. Of course, if you are stacking Golds or Wards, then those can go on anybody, or on units who aren't holding the Honed and Fortify buffs. To further explain this, I'll use my own Horse Emblem team and explain why each unit has a certain buff. My main cavalry team for the longest time has consisted of Frederick, Xander, Reinhardt, and Camus. Frederick uses a Brave Axe build, so he is my go-to physical damage dealer. By having Fortify Cavalry, he can pass the defensive buffs to Xander and Camus to help them tank better. I am not using Frederick to tank because even though his defense is pretty solid, his low speed makes him vulnerable. Xander is my main tank in this team thanks to his distant counter weapon, and by giving him quick riposte he can dish out some good damage with 2 attacks. Xander has honed cavalry because he doesn't exactly need the extra attack or speed to do his job, and he can then power up my main sweepers to help them power through tough enemies. It's extra effective on brave weapons because they essentially get to use that bonus attack value twice. Reinhardt is my magic damage counterpart to Frederick, and his job is to also delete the enemy forces with his Dire Thunder Tome. Reinhardt has Gold Cavalry by default, and I never felt the need to swap it out to Ward Cavalry. Meanwhile, Camus is on my all-around generalist, and he can either defend with his distant counter lance, or dish out good damage with his decent speed and a honed cavalry buff. He is a good example of a unit who actually benefits really well from both honed and fortified cavalry. Camus also comes with Gold Cavalry by default, and he can help buff Frederick and Reinhardt to dish out even more damage. This team is geared mostly toward an offensive playstyle, and double Gold Cavalry buffs help that a lot. If I were to use units with more defensive stats, then maybe I would go with double Ward Cavalry, or maybe one of each. It all comes down to what unit you use and how they work together as a team. I have another team example to talk about, and I want to emphasize just how varied your buff combinations can be depending on your playstyle. Here is an Armor Emblem team that I don't have, but for the sake of example is what I'm going to use to talk about. We have 4 armor units with either close counter or distant counter abilities, so they can all counterattack at any range. With this we want to take on a defensive playstyle and let the enemy come to us. A very popular Armor Emblem strategy, as I mentioned, is to stack 4 ward armor buffs. If you can stay within the correct formation, then each armor unit will receive the effects of 3 other ward armor buffs, totaling for a plus 12 to defense and resistance. This is disgusting, and most armor units already have high defense or resistance stats, so trying to break this team down is going to be a challenge. However, this is not the only way to play Armor Emblem. With the introduction of Armor March, armor teams have the option to go for a much more offensive playstyle. If you don't know what Armor March does, then I have made a video talking about it, and I'll link it as a card here. Basically, Armor March lets your armor units move 2 spaces, and this makes a huge difference when trying to make offensive moves during the player phase. In this team, Armor March, Hone Armor, and Fortify Armor are great because the team may not stick together to receive the benefits from Ward or Gold Armor. Of course, skill choice still depends on the type of units you use, and this team is a good example of a situation where maybe I do want to run 2 Hone Armors. Let's say I swap out Black Knight's Ward Armor for a Hone Armor buff. This can now buff up Halloween Jacob, and if the team gets separated due to Armor March, then there's a chance that mostly everyone can still get a boost to their attack and speed. If your team benefits heavily from a Hone or Fortify skill, then maybe do think about running 2 copies on one team. It may not be as efficient, but it could be the better choice for your specific team, or maybe that's all you got, and that is perfectly fine. I hope my examples gave you a better understanding of how you can build your emblem teams and decide on who gets which type of buff. There really is no single answer since every team is different and people have different playstyles and units obtained. Overall, the class buffs are what really make emblem teams super powerful. If you have not tried building one, then I suggest starting with Horse Emblem, and there are many guides out there that even go through individual units. For newer players, building emblem teams are a great way to get better at team building in general, and it will make you realize that a synergistic team can be a lot better than just a team of just strong individual units. This video and the last have gone through a lot of changes, but I hope you guys learned something useful. We're in the last month of the game's first year since launch, so I'm really excited what the 1-year anniversary will change. I still have video ideas I want to create, but if any big updates get announced, I'll be sure to cover any major changes that occur. I'll see you guys in my next video.